Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is CNA's sixth webinar since COVID-19 came to Canada. With our inability to come together in person, the CNA team wanted to bring in interesting and thought-leading speakers on a variety of topics that could provide members with something useful and engaging virtually. Today, we've teamed up with Gowling WLG to explore the Canadian regulatory framework for minimum staffing and operator certification for nuclear power reactors, as well as the positive steps nuclear operators are taking to manage staff and contractors' safety, to mitigate risks, and maintain safe operations. I just want to say that through this period, this crisis, I've been very proud to be part of an industry that has served Canadians so well. As a critical service that has institutions like hospitals and long-term care facilities where so many of us have, loved ones and other essential services that we are providing for. The nuclear industry in particular has done a tremendous job. And I'm also proud to be part of this industry which has given back so much to Canadians through all sorts of different means, including the personal protective equipment that has been donated by utilities like Bruce and OPG and New Brunswick Power and others. The amazing work that our supply chain has done and the innovative work that it's done in terms of even retooling its existing facilities and operations and services to give back to the community has been very inspiring, and something that the nuclear industry in Canada, and I'm sure globally, can be very proud of. I would say an observation that I have made is that the fact that the electricity sector generally and the nuclear sector in particular has been so resilient and so dependable is in a sense a double-edged sword. Electricity is ubiquitous and often not given the credit that it deserves generally, for supporting the many things we do in everyday life, in both personal and a business perspective. And through this period, because nuclear has performed so well, we've had the benefit of not being drawn into the spotlight, which is a good thing, of course, but it's also been an interesting challenge for us to be going to government and pointing out that there are things that our industry needs as well. In particular, the companies in our supply chain, which have been exposed to all sorts of risk and hardship, et cetera, and some of our technology suppliers now, particularly in the SMR space, and even some of our utilities, which are having to make critical investments and decisions in this period as we ramp up some of the new technologies, whether they're health or electricity related, that we're bringing forward. So it has been challenging to get attention in that sense. But it also presents an opportunity. I think our resilience, which is of course the topic of today's seminar, and our performance presents an opportunity for us to communicate strongly the value of our industry and nuclear to Canadian society. So I hope that there will be some discussion about that when we get into the question and answer session after the presentations this morning. As most of you will be aware, there is an actual question and answer balloon at the bottom of the screen. So this is the area in which you can type questions. The way that the webinar is going to work today is that we have an hour and a half. We'll have about 50 minutes to 60 minutes of presentations from 5 different speakers who are joining us this morning. And you can ask questions in that question and answer balloon through the presentations, but we won't actually open up the floor for questions and answers and discussion until we get through all of the presentations. But please put the questions in as we go along here. The other thing is just a reminder to everyone that we are recording today's webinar for broadcast. So if that factors into any of the things that you're asking or questioning or remarking on, just be aware of that. Now back to our partner in today's webinar, Gowling, WLG, which, as many of you know, is an international law firm that focuses on key global sectors, including energy, financial services, life sciences, natural resources, real estate, and technology. With roots tracing back to 1887, Gowling's has grown to become one of the largest and most respected law firms in Canada, with a reputation for innovation and client-focused service delivery. Now, we have a tremendous group of panelists lined up for you this morning. I'm certain there will be plenty to discuss through the session. So I'd like to dive in right now and introduce Gowling's Global Director of Nuclear Power Generation, Ahab Abdelaziz. Ahab is recognized as a leader in the global nuclear sector, a field in which he has worked for more than 25 years. He leads an international team in projects around the world and has represented leading nuclear vendors, governments, and clients in major nuclear new build transactions, as well as serving as lead counsel in major nuclear disputes. Ahab also advises clients on policy and legislative development, nuclear program and project development, regulatory and licensing, and much more. Ahab is the president of the Canadian Law Organization, a member of the board of the International Nuclear Law Association, and is recognized as a top energy lawyer by multiple publications. Allow me to hand it over now to Ahab.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that extremely kind introduction. And thank you for bringing us together and hosting this event, which I think is a very important one. I'm just going to take a few brief moments to talk about why this event, to my mind, is an important one and the kind of conversation that I hope we will come out of the event with. So we're sitting, obviously, let me state the obvious because I'm a lawyer and we're good at that, but we're sitting in the middle of, still in the middle of a global pandemic with over 7.5 million confirmed cases, over 50,000 from yesterday alone. We're sitting over 422,000 deaths, unfortunately, and over 1,700 from yesterday. And we are all members of a nuclear industry that is intimately familiar with managing risks of exposure to potentially dangerous conditions. Something we're very good at. Our industry operates subject to some of the most stringent regulatory requirements that apply to any industry. And when it comes to acting to avoid the possibility of public or worker exposure that could lead to adverse health impacts, I think it's fair to say that we are all subject to uncompromising regulatory requirements and self-imposed requirements within the industry. So to meet the high bar that the industry sets for itself and has set for it by its regulator as it performs its necessary tasks is no mean feat. To do that in the middle of a global pandemic with the kind of infectious power that COVID has had is truly remarkable. It's even more remarkable to note that the nuclear industry did not shut down during the pandemic. Power reactors have kept on producing electricity. Refurbishment projects have moved forward. OPG managed to return Darlington Unit 2 to the grid. And as OPG's president and CEO, Ken Hartwick, put it, it did that at a time of unprecedented circumstances. New build projects continued in the US, the UK, and elsewhere in the world. And so despite these stringent requirements that apply to the industry, despite the challenges of a global pandemic, apart from the outbreak at Fermi 2 in the US, I personally haven't heard about serious outbreaks in the nuclear sector. And if you compare what's happened in the nuclear sector to other sectors that perhaps have some emphasis on protecting health, like food processing plants, meat packing plants. You'll see that we've had really large outbreaks at numerous plants across North America, and that the pandemic experience and performance of this industry, the nuclear industry, compares favorably and quite well. So why are we talking about this? Well, it's not just an exercise in self-congratulation. My own view is that at this moment in history, nuclear's safety culture and emergency preparedness ethics hold very important lessons for governments and for industry leaders. And I think these are lessons that can help to save lives and help to avert economic disasters potentially, particularly if we have to face a second or third wave of COVID infections down the road. Nuclear industry is particularly at managing a type of risk that others really struggle with, which is systemic risk. This is the kind of risk you don't necessarily control directly. That's very difficult to predict, but not impossible. And between the nuclear industry's risk identification and risk management ethic and its emergency preparedness mindset, it manages to deal with these types of risks very effectively, as this pandemic has shown. And I think it is important for us to get this message out to other industries and to governments that we as an industry have something to contribute. So with that, I'm looking forward to hearing our expert panel walk us through just how this has been and gets regularly achieved every day, both from the regulator side, the utility side, and industry associations. So back over to you, John.
Thanks, Ahab. It's been an absolute pleasure to be partnering with Gowling on the preparation for this webinar and bringing together such an exceptional and distinguished panel. So I will introduce our first two panelists, Lisa Teal and Ramsey Jamal. Our next these two speakers come to us from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and they will be giving us the regulator's perspective, as Ahab mentioned. Lisa Teal joined the CNSC in 2004 with extensive experience in administrative law and other federal quasi-judicial administrative tribunals. As Senior General Counsel, Lisa leads a dedicated team delivering legal advice and litigation services. She acts as Commission Counsel in regular public hearings and meetings across Canada. Now, alongside Lisa this morning is Ramsey Jamal. Ramsey has worked for the CNSC since 1998, holding progressively senior positions. He's accumulated more than 20 years of experience in the nuclear industry, combining management skills with scientific expertise and representing the CNSC in various international activities. These include the development and establishment of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Code of Conduct for the Safety and Security of Radioactive Sources, and the international categorization of radioactive sources. He also played a key role in ensuring that the recommendations of the International Commission on Radiation Protection complemented the CNSC's regulatory needs. So Lisa and Ramsey, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for that, John. And I would just like to say thank you to the CNA and to Gowling for inviting the regulatory perspective on this important issue. So perhaps I will do a legal setup of the regulatory framework for nuclear regulation in Canada, and then I will pass it along to Ramsey Jamal, who will give you a much more operational perspective. So the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is the federal nuclear regulator in Canada, and nuclear regulation in Canada is federal. It is the Nuclear Safety and Control Act that creates the CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And incidentally, the Nuclear Safety and Control Act is just now 20. It came into force in May of 2000, so we're celebrating a 20-year anniversary just now. So the Nuclear Safety and Control Act puts primary responsibility for safety on operators, and it gives the mandate to the Commission, firstly, to regulate. And we regulate to ensure that the use of nuclear energy and materials does not pose an unreasonable risk to the health and safety of persons, to the environment, to national security. Two other important aspects of our mandate: we implement Canada's international commitments respecting the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and we have an obligation to disseminate objective scientific, technical, and regulatory information to the public. And I'd just like to say a couple of things about those last 2 points. On Canada's international commitments respecting the peaceful use of nuclear energy, especially during this COVID time, the importance of international cooperation is key. So one of Canada's international commitments is that it's a signatory to the Convention on Nuclear Safety. The preamble to the Convention on Nuclear Safety emphasizes the importance to nuclear safety of international cooperation, and we are certainly living that now, and the international cooperation among regulators, and I'm sure you'll hear later among operators, is one of the things that's very helpful. And on dissemination of information, of course, we're all isolated at home, and we are all living a very different reality. So we're finding new ways to speak with the public, to disseminate information. And I just want to make a plug. Next week, the Commission will hold its first virtual Commission public meeting. And so anyone who'd like to is welcome to join us for that. Next slide, please. So I'll just say a little bit about the regulator's initial response. We as a regulator require our regulated to do pretty detailed contingency planning. And of course, the regulator has a business continuity plan as well, which was activated in mid-March. And then we did a transition from an office working model to remote working from home in a new configuration. We call it a new normal. It isn't so normal. However, we have been able to deliver on our mandate and provide the regulatory oversight that has been required. And we do that with regulatory flexibility and by being as agile as we can. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just set up a little bit the legal framework for the regulation of nuclear power plants, or NPPs, because that's, I think, the basis of what we're going to be discussing today. So that legal framework starts with the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, which sets out the licensing scheme, the license requirements for nuclear facilities. A nuclear power plant is in Canada a Class 1 nuclear facility, and so there are Class 1 nuclear facility regulations that set out licensing requirements, application requirements, program requirements of licensees, and sets out such things as the process for certification of staff at NPPs who have to be certified by the regulator as qualified to do their operations. And of course, the operational framework document is the license and the license condition handbook. So our NPP licenses have standardized license conditions, and then the compliance verification criteria are set out in the license condition handbook. And some of those compliance verification criteria can include regulatory documents, standards, guidance. This is a, generally speaking, performance-based scheme. And when I say performance-based, that's in contradistinction to prescriptive. So it's about, here are the goals, here's the safety thing to meet, And you should propose licensees. You have some marge de manœuvre on how you're going to meet those safety goals. And then we will regulate and oversee and verify your compliance against how you said you would do that. For anyone who is interested in a deeper dive on the legal parameters of what it means to regulate in a performance-based way, I'll just make a pitch. The NEA, the Nuclear Energy Agency, publishes twice a year a nuclear law bulletin. And in the latest volume 103 of the Nuclear Law Bulletin, is an article written by a member of my staff called Key Legal Considerations for Performance-Based Regulating. So for anyone who wants to do a little more on that, I commend that article. Next slide, please. So in a pandemic, physical distancing is a priority. Everyone's safety is paramount. It's super important that the CNSC understand, and it does, where licensees may seek some degree of regulatory relief. There are potential areas where flexibility may be required in these extraordinary circumstances. For example, personnel certification. So those staff who need to be certified, there are pretty circumscribed training requirements in order to be certified, in order to keep certification, and certification has a 5-year limit and has to be renewed with additional training. Maintenance scheduling is another thing that may need flexibility, reporting requirements, timelines. The existing CNSC procedures that are documented in its management system is the mechanism for ensuring continued safe operation while minimizing regulatory impacts during the pandemic and finding the appropriate compliance arrangements for safe operation, with the sort of guiding sense of, will the requested flexibility result in compromised safety? And so within that, there is some regulatory flexibility that is within the authority of the CNSC staff relating to the exercise of their enforcement authority. So if there's notice of a pending or potential non-compliance for pandemic-related reasons, staff may, on an administrative forbearance footing, elect to not take compliance and enforcement action. This would be applicable for matters of lower safety significance and where a licensee has shown the kinds of alternate measures, compensatory measures, how they're attempting to meet a certain parameter otherwise, or working on alternative means of getting to the intention of the requirement. Of course, in other cases, there are requirements that either come from the license or from the regulations, and in those cases, only the Commission can give relief with respect to a requirement that it has imposed, and it does have under the statute the authority to exempt from any requirement of the Act or the regs under Section 7 of the statute, and that too is guided by provisions of the regulations. And so what's important here is that the regulator has to be able to anticipate, plan, and with the industry have a see on the horizon what's coming, and that is what we're doing with the goal of finding the appropriate ways to make sure that we maintain adequate safety. So with that set up, I will turn la parole to my colleague Ramsey Jamal, who will provide a much less dry and more more operational perspective from the regulator. Thank you.
Okay. Merci Lisa, bonjour tout le monde, and thank you for the introduction by John and Ahab. I don't know, the regulator is always dry, Lisa, so do not take it just the legal section. So I will start with the fact that under the convention, and it's embedded in law, that our regulatory oversight will continue, so that will be no compromise to safety. At the same time, the responsibility of the operators is enshrined with respect to their regulatory control of their activity at all times. And as Lisa mentioned, we regulate the 3 S's: safety, security, and safeguard, and they are all being overseen by the CNSC, hence, which leads me to the modernization of inspections. Any regulator, and in specific the CNSC, who think can operate in isolation without interaction with the operators, in my opinion, is not an effective regulator. Isolation of the regulator probably might cause, I have mentioned systemic risk, could cause a systematic over-regulation or not knowing what's going on in the industry. From our perspective, the pandemic forced us to look at modernization of inspections, and we were able to use remote and what we call the desktop inspections for NPP or power reactors. And that was due to the openness of our operators, allowing our staff access to their systems. So the assessment is taking place on a daily basis based on the operations of the reactor. So from the time of this presentation was submitted, our staff as inspectors did visit the site physical inspections, and the focus was on the implementation of the COVID and the business continuity plan or response to the pandemic. And we, as a regulator, we're doing a lot of exchange of lessons learned experiences with other regulators. Ahab mentioned the meat plan issues and the shutdowns of the meat plan, but the root cause was the safety culture that didn't exist. And I know I am in public domain. I'm not a politician nor a diplomat, so I'm going to call it the way it is. The CNSC takes every experience from other regulators in consideration, and so we did look at the analysis from the Canadian cargo plant, and was there any lessons learned we can look at and make sure it doesn't happen from a nuclear sector. So far, our analysis demonstrate that there are 2 separate issues, and what is happening in the nuclear field is not being implemented at all in the meat plan. Our discussions based on openness, transparency, we contacted our licensee of major facilities, NPPs, reprocessing, and waste management to make sure that the BCP has been implemented. And we did verify the measures taken by our licensees to include radioactive materials who are all over Canada for many purposes, from medical to industrial applications. And then we did not stop at all our licensing process and the approvals, let it be for license renewal or removing hold points with respect to refurbishment or outages activity that will be coming forth towards us as a regulator. And as Lisa mentioned, we did not, or Ms. Steele mentioned, we did not compromise safety, but we demonstrated flexibility. It will be nice to hear from our licensees if they think the same of our flexibility or not. Next slide, please. Transparency is key. Our stakeholders are not just the licensees. The applications before us will continue. Many projects continue to be present in front of the Commission, either via different levels of approval, from environmental assessment or the new law impact assessment, or the licensing process for amendments or modifications. So as a trusted regulator, we ensure that our stakeholder engagement is taking place, specifically with our indigenous peoples and the communities. And staff did not stop at all, so we are using alternate technologies to communicate and address any of the concerns. And we will be faced with the first time ever in the history of the CNSC, virtual proceedings of our commission. And if you've got time on your hand, will be interesting to get a feedback and to listen to the commission hearing itself. It is a commission meeting. There are no licensing decisions, but a lot of information being presented to the commission. Safety culture was mentioned before, and it's not only at the operators level. I am the internal safety culture champion at the CNSC. And if you don't have a sound, healthy safety culture within the organization as a regulator, it reflects on the outside. So our executive management team, led by our president, Ms. Romina Velshi, we do meet on a daily basis at the early stage of the pandemic. We have town hall discussions with our staff, and we continue our communication with staff to make sure that they are not impacted, or if they are impacted, to provide the ability to assist them, let it be mental health, challenges from working from home, and family issues. So we use both the federal availability of support and the CNSC as a choice of employer. We had established a special contract for medical and mental physical health capability. Next slide, please. So pandemic effect on innovation, we took an opportunity for us to look at how can we improve things instead of just trying to revert back to what we were comfortable with as a normal. Even though we call it a new normal, but it's an opportunity for all of us as regulators around the world to look at how can we improve our systematic approach for compliance verification and inspection activity. We're able to use data and analytics to analyze the data. We're not done yet. We're going to be working in a transparent manner with our licensees because they lead on many fronts. We will be able to engage to determine what they're doing meets our requirements and how can we capitalize and embark as a regulator to make sure that what's being done will meet our requirements. As Madam Thiel mentioned before, that we are performance-based risk-informed requirements will be taken into consideration rather than rigid rule-based approaches. And communication and engagement transparency maintain public trust. At the same time, we need to continue to accept that our staff will be trusted in rendering a decision. And that is key, especially in a virtual remote functionality. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, next steps. Internationally, I can speak as I was the president of the 7th Review Convention on Nuclear Safety, and I'm privileged to be a panelist with the CEO of WANO, Ingmar, and I will call on WANO to make sure that they will show up and present themselves at the Convention on Nuclear Safety, because I can speak freely to say I sweated blood in order to allow the contracting parties, to allow the operators to come and sit as an observer. So I really would like this way forward as WANO, who represents the operators who have primary responsibility for safety, to engage at the discussions with respect to the convention itself. Our president is the chair of the Commission of Safety Standards at the IAEA, which is the body that sets the international standards. And she presented a call for the Director General of the IAEA to start to do gap analysis of the safety standard internationally with respect to the pandemic. I think I have mentioned in John, this is the only event in the world that impacts everybody, governments, operators, regulators, So what is now the gap in the international standards by which the government requirements and responsibility to ensure there is adequate regulatory functions in place will be looked at from the Commission of Safety Standard. Same thing applies for the convention. We wrote to the president of the 8th review of the convention so that the contracting parties means both operators, regulators, to provide reports and updates with respect to dealing with the pandemic. And we need to continue, and we're able to identify opportunities to improve communication and messaging and information transfer that is key. And we will continue to enhance our capability with respect to lessons learned so that we are always improving without compromise to safety. I mentioned the international collaboration is key. Domestic collaboration is key, and to learn from other regulators. If they do it properly, we'll learn from them. If they are facing challenges, we'll learn from the challenges and the experience that they went through. Next slide, please. Thank you, and we're ready to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa and Ramsey. And just a reminder to everyone listening in today that you've got that question and answer balloon there. I'm sure you've got some thoughts, questions that may have come up during that presentation. And if you put them in there, we'll try to get to them after we get through the next three presenters. I just wanted to say, Lisa and Ramsey, the CNSC has proven to be one of Canada's assets through this pandemic, for sure, through its flexibility and discretion. And I can tell you that, I hear that from the players in the industry. But I also wanted to say that, the CNSC is an important ingredient to what I think is Canada's position globally as a potential first mover in SMRs. The performance-based and non-prescriptive approach that the CNSC takes really gives us an advantage with things like this, the new innovative technologies that are coming through for review and licensing. I'm talking about the SMRs here, of course, and while Canada's strength really does have to do with the collaboration that we have between all of our industry players, I know that performance-based and non-prescriptive approach really is something that's attractive to many of the players around the world who are looking to roll out SMRs quickly. And so that's a big asset for us, and we appreciate it. Now, next up is Ontario Power Generation's Chief Nuclear Officer, Sean Granville. I can see Sean there. Sean, I don't know if I've told you this before, but you have a fond place in my thoughts because you're one of the first people who just personally took the time to bring me through some of the really fundamental stuff of the nuclear industry when I joined, and appreciate having that personal tour of Darlington with you. It was a real eye-opener. Now, prior to his role as CNO, Sean spent 3 years at the Point Lepreau nuclear generating station in New Brunswick as the site vice president and CNO. Sean's extensive background includes a 35-year career with OPG and the former Ontario Hydro, of course, holding positions such as Deputy Vice President, Director of Operations and Maintenance, Director of Nuclear Programs. He has expertise in operational leadership, leader development, performance improvement, organizational effectiveness, and industry engagement. Sean's nuclear industry experience also includes a secondment to the World Association of Nuclear Operators, serving on the board of directors of the Canadian Nuclear Association, and acting as a voting member of the CANDU Owners Group. I'll pass it over to you, Sean.
Thanks, John. Great introduction. And, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this webinar in conjunction with, a really great set of panelists. So thanks. OPG's mission can be summarized in 3 simple words: power with purpose. And I'd argue that same mission could equally be applied to the nuclear industry in general. We deliver power with purpose. And I'd suggest that the global pandemic that we are all dealing with is an excellent example of how we are doing exactly that. This webinar is about nuclear resilience. And I'm going to talk to OPG's response to COVID-19 which demonstrates that resilience and is anchored by some fundamental characteristics that support and demonstrate a very strong and healthy safety culture. Characteristics that helped underpin our response have been preparation, execution, collaboration, innovation, and social license. So let's start with preparation. We had a very strong pandemic plans backed up by solid business continuity plans. Our secure supply of personal protective equipment not only assured that we had sufficient supplies for our own team, but we were able to donate over 1 million pieces of PPE, including N95 and surgical masks, Tyvek suits, and 3D printed face masks to frontline healthcare workers in the very early days when supplies were desperately short in the province. I know Bruce Power followed suit, so this was really the whole nuclear industry stepping up and showing leadership. Being prepared, having a solid plan that we drilled, set us up well for execution. So at OPG, we launched our Infectious Disease Incident Response Team, or IDIRT, in January in response to the outbreak in Wuhan. IDIRT reported weekly to our executive team and laid the foundation for mobilizing our Crisis Management and Communications Center in early March, which I chair. This helped us to quickly transition from planning to boots on the ground. We also established COVID command centers at each of our sites to put the plans into action. Priority was to keep our people and our plants safe. Managing safety and risk is what we do. I like to summarize it as screen, clean, and distance. So we quickly put in place a number of practical provisions that supported that. Things like temperature screening of everyone entering the protected area. We assembled a clean team to regularly clean high-touch surfaces. We modified our practices to support physical distancing, including revised start times, staggered breaks, repurposed offices and conference rooms for lunch and break spaces, and we restricted access to the main control room. We established robust processes to quickly address any suspect cases to isolate, deep clean, and contact trace. All of this to support the safe operation of our units and continue to drive some really critical projects to provide the grid with maximum options and flexibility. The best example was the completion of construction and the return to service of Darlington Unit 2 following the 3.5-year refurbishment project. I'm particularly proud of the ops team who successfully executed multiple first-of-a-kind and first-in-a-while evolutions as part of the restart under some really unique conditions. I'd also like to provide a shout out to the CNSC, who had to approve a number of hold points as part of the startup. They maintained their same high standards while showing incredible flexibility under these unique circumstances. Next, I want to talk about collaboration. This is a fundamental part of the industry DNA, and it really helped OPG in our response. Here's a sampling of some of that collaboration. We've had weekly calls with WANO, COG, NEI, and EPRI to share sort of on-the-fly responses, solutions, and challenges. We've had weekly calls with the CNOs from Bruce Power, NB Power, and Chernavoda. We've shared processes, procedures, and parts. So for example, Duke Power recently sent us a UV light to support our development of a portable UV sanitation kit for control panels, which we are then going to share back with the industry. Another great example of collaboration, early in the pandemic, Bruce Power was ahead of us in terms of developing a sequester plan as a contingency if things got bad enough that you needed to sequester critical staff on site. We used that plan to very quickly spool up our own sequester contingency. Now I want to talk about innovation. We implemented a solutions team to quickly identify, evaluate, and implement solutions to support the response. The example ranged from high-tech to very low-tech solutions that supported our mantra, speed over elegance. Some examples that the team implemented include repurposing station thermography cameras to screen all of our workers entering the plant for fever, 3D printing face shields for OPG staff and frontline healthcare workers, development of that portable UV sanitation kit I was referring to, homegrown hand sanitizers made in our chemistry labs at our sites. Finally, I want to talk about social license. Again, this is part of our DNA. We are a partner in our communities, and it's those communities that allow us to operate. So examples of things that OPG has done include the PPE donations I talked about previously. Also, in partnership with the local hospital, OPG volunteers sewed 9,000 medical grade cloth masks for distributions to healthcare workers. And we've donated over $900,000 to food banks across the province, including $250,000 emergency food support for Indigenous communities in Northwest Ontario. Throughout this pandemic, we've had about 4,000 people continue to work to keep the lights on and power the province, with about 5,000 others working from home. Through that, we have had zero transmission on any of our sites across the province. So to summarize, OPG and really the rest of the nuclear community in Canada has demonstrated power with purpose. We continue to meet the challenge that this pandemic is throwing at us, and we aren't going to let our guard down. We led the response to this pandemic, and we're going to lead the way out. So for OPG, that means returning to our offices at 50% capacity beginning June 1st, and that's gone very well. Restarting our project work at site in a controlled and stepped fashion. Starting our Darlington Unit 3 refurbishment project on September 1st, and executing our Pickering outage program starting with Unit 4 in August. We're going to repower the province, drive the economy, and show that it be done safely, with quality, on budget, and on schedule. That's resilience, and that's leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean, for that overview of the many ways in which OPG has been giving back to the community and the steps that it's taken to ensure that we have these essential services that have been supporting all elements of our society through there. The leadership has been terrific. Now, we're going to be hearing from Bruce Powers, Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Operations Services. That's James Skoniak. James, you and I have had lots of opportunity over the last weeks and months to collaborate on all sorts of things, and you're always one of the first people I give a call to when I've got a question. I'm looking for some advice, and I just want to say through this crisis, Bruce Powers' leadership and your leadership with Mike Renchek has really been inspiring, especially through those initiatives like the COVID-19 Retooling and Recovery Council that you've been leading, which has been so helpful for the industry and for the supply chain in particular. So thank you for that. James is a member of the executive team responsible for environmental and waste management, Indigenous and community relations, and corporate social responsibility. In his role, he's also been the executive lead for the site's lease with the province and isotope development. James was part of the Bruce Power team, which successfully negotiated a long-term commercial framework with the province of Ontario, extending the life of the facility to 2064. That's amazing, isn't it? Enabling the $13 billion life extension program. He also served as the executive co-host of the 2015 IAEA Operational Safety Review Team, or OSART mission. James sits on the board of Life Labs, Canada's largest independent provider of laboratory services. He's also a generator representative for nuclear and co-chair on the Independent Electricity System Operator Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Welcome, James.
Great, thanks very much for having me, John. And I'll make sure in my remarks I don't repeat anything that Sean said, but I think obviously as a fellow nuclear operator, I think Sean hit the nail on the head in a number of areas and a number of values that we share. And before I get into some of my remarks that I wanted to share with people, I really do want to do a shout out to Ontario Power Generation and their contractors and partners on the successful refurbishment of Unit 2. There's a lot of people that have been I think very early suggesting we weren't going to be successful with those projects, and the industry had done a lot to prepare for that success. And Darlington Unit 2 is really leading the way as the first in a series of successful refurbishment projects that will come, I'm sure, no doubt at OPG and at the Bruce site as we're into currently into Unit 6. I just want to, first and foremost recognize OPG. It's an amazing accomplishment, and I think the collaboration is very important. That we learn from the things that went well, the things that we want to improve in future units, and there's very good alignment between the Bruce Power and OPG teams on that. So congratulations to you and the team, Sean. I really want to start at sort of the highest level here before we get into some of the particulars around our response to COVID. And if you think about the Bruce site, obviously a very self-contained site located in a rural area, the largest private sector infrastructure program in the country, largest nuclear facility in the world, and some of the attributes that come along with that, both present some challenges and some opportunities. On the opportunity side, we are in a rural area. So, if we think about a context such as COVID-19, you're in terms of your employees and their interactions, people tend to come from a relatively lower populated area than an urban center. So, as we talk about our COVID response, that's a very important attribute. The other element, and fairly consistent with what Sean talked about at Darlington, is, you not only have an operational site, but you have a site that is undergoing regular maintenance, outage maintenance, but also heavy construction. So when you're thinking about your various priorities and how you prioritize items in a pandemic and an emergency situation, you're really taking into account a number of elements. And so if I sort of talk about this from the context of, what were people counting on Bruce Power to do during this pandemic? Well, I think it was really simple. I think people were counting on us to do four very important things. I think the first was, we were holding ourselves to the standard, and other people in the community were holding ourselves to the standard. Our employees were, that no matter what, we were going to keep people safe. We weren't going to put production or any work ahead of the safety of employees. And typically when we think about safety at our site, we talk about nuclear safety, which the overarching pillar is reactor safety, industrial safety, radiological safety, and environmental safety. But with the introduction of COVID, we're now talking about a whole other element there. So, we held ourselves to the standards of that safety first, value first. The second area was that we needed to continue to power our homes, our schools, our hospitals, and other institutions. That some, like schools, that ramped down obviously as the pandemic progressed, but we needed to keep our essential services powered with electricity. And so that is obviously a top priority, but not also a priority in the short term, but the long term. When we look at something like a pandemic, it is very likely to have a very long run on it. We are not assuming any major changes till at least the end of 2021. And so with that context, we have to think about, generating not only electricity for the short term, but ensuring we're carrying out the appropriate innage and outage maintenance, inspections, and various other activities to keep those units reliable, not just in the short term, but the long term. And then, of course, there's our medical isotope business. We're one of the world's largest providers of cobalt-60, which is used in sterilization of medical equipment, as is Sean's facility at Pickering. And that's something we as Canadians should be very proud of. And the world and Nordion is counting on Canada and our nuclear facilities at Bruce and Pickering to maintain that supply of cobalt-60. And just to give you an example, we completed our shipment of cobalt-60 from our Unit 6 outage just actually as the pandemic was declared in early March. And we shipped enough cobalt-60 to Nordion to sterilize 13 billion pairs of sterilized medical gloves. And so when we think about the pandemic, we think of Canada's response. We are a core provider of that cobalt-60, and that cobalt-60 will remain a very strategic element to Canada's contribution to this international effort. So that's what people were counting on us to do. And then the fourth area they were also counting on us for was being a large organization in small town rural Ontario, is recognizing we don't have a lot of the same public service infrastructure that there is in urban areas. So doing whatever we can as a company to make sure our community is strong. And so those were really the key objectives that we identified for ourselves. we really achieved those key objectives through a number of initiatives. And, I'm not going to repeat a lot of the areas that Sean talked about, but really, all of the things that we drill for, all the things that we prepare for from an emergency management perspective, I think that's actually why nuclear fared quite well, because we had a lot of these capabilities in place, which have good command and control structures, good clarity, good procedures, good organizational alignment. And we utilized all of those tools that were at our disposal to respond to the situation. And I think that's why we've had the kind of discipline. If you think about our response and how we utilize that capability, the first goal was to reduce our numbers on site. Really, very quickly, we had a major component replacement program that was ahead of schedule. So we wanted to safely put that in a safe state, reduce the numbers on site to core operations staff only, focus on the completion of our ongoing outage, and really get the numbers down so we could implement a lot of prevention measures. So as the event unfolded and stabilized, we could then begin to increase numbers on site. We stabilized the operation. We have nearly 3,000 people working from home. We don't expect that to change anytime soon. We want to keep our focus, given the unique nature of our site where it's all on one physical site, keep people working from home and prioritize the staff who need to be in the plant. I think there were two other health items we also had to keep into account. There's obviously people's physical health, and we launched an innovative app with a service provider where every one of our employees could access medical care and medical advice through their iPhone or through their personal device for them or their families. And the reason why that was important was because we recognized the demands on the local healthcare system and needed to ensure that employees, for routine prescription refills or other health concerns they have, that they could do that virtually from the safety of their home and not overload the healthcare system, and also keep people at home as best as possible, which especially in the early days was quite important. The other area that we shouldn't underestimate here is people's mental health. This is a very traumatic situation. It's impacted people in many different ways, and the mental health toll of COVID-19 is significant. And so really, put a tremendous amount of focus on mental health, making sure people knew that they had additional supports. We rolled out those additional supports, but in particular for those employees who had to still come into site, despite all of the safety measures we put in place, despite the things that Sean talked about, that the industry did that I think we're leading, it still has a tremendous mental health burden on people to have to come in to work, to operate in an essential service, when they may have family members at home that are worried about them going into work. They may have loved ones that are in a long-term care home. They may have a loved one who is a nurse or another essential service. So tremendous stresses on people. And, I think that is a really important component in terms of our response. We're dealing with people here. We're not dealing with robots. We're dealing with people who have their own fears, their own aspirations, their own hopes. And so that was a tremendous focus of us, of keeping people's head in the games and also knowing that they were doing something important and special. Just to really build on some of Sean's comments from an external perspective, we too, we were proud of donating 1.3 million pieces of PPE, the largest private sector donation in Canada. That included 55,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, 200,000 pieces of PPE for the Grey Bruce region. It's no good for us to have prevention measures on site at Bruce Power and PPE for our employees if a nurse at the local hospital doesn't have an N95 mask to protect his or herself, and then they go home and they're with a Bruce Power employee at home, if that's a partner or somebody in the community. So when we're thinking about a pandemic response, we can't just think about looking after our own site. We have to think about the community spread around us. And that really led to us quickly standing up 150 bed pop-up hospitals that would be available. Thank goodness they weren't needed. We spent a lot of effort on communications, making some of the best and most innovative communication tools available to public health, so people in the community got the message. Again, you can't be successful on a nuclear site if the community around you isn't successful. And then also recognizing that this had a lot of economic devastation. And so contributions to food banks, we had care packages for frontline healthcare workers, care packages for seniors who are stuck in their houses and may not be able to get out, and make sure those folks are taken care of. that's really what a community is all about, is looking out for each other. So, I'll leave it there, John, and, open to questions. But what I can tell you is, we as an industry, and I agree with the kudos for the CNSC, the CNSC didn't lower the bar, but what they did was recognize that in a pandemic, there may be different ways we have to demonstrate and communicate that we're meeting the bar. And I think through some of the virtual inspections, the virtual information, some of the additional rigor that was put on there, I think was quite healthy. But the thing I will tell you, across the industry, we ought to be very, very proud of our people. They stepped up, whether it's suppliers, whether it's our organized labor, people stepped up and did amazing things. And I think that is one of the greatest takeaways for our industry in this. We have great people. We have some of the best people out there in terms of technical capability, ingenuity. And I think if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that we can leverage this nuclear industry to do so many things. Some of the greatest challenges that we have as Canadians that are even outside of nuclear, I think we have some of the best people. And I think, COVID tells us that we can leverage that ingenuity for a lot of things. So John, I'll pass it back over to you, and I'm looking forward to any questions people have.
Thank you very much, James, and thanks for bringing in the people side of this, and in particular the sort of mental and psychological health and safety of all of the great people that we have in this industry. Your comments about the type of pressures that everyone is under with COVID, worrying about their loved ones and being exposed to the virus, and especially true for our workers who are going in to operate plants and things, offering an essential service under such such strict guidelines and things like that. It's from a resilience point of view, it's really important that that as employers we're taking care of our people. So last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Ingmar Enqvist. Ingmar is the CEO of the World Association of Nuclear Operators, or WANO, as most of you know it. Ingmar has been with WANO Paris Center Director since 2016. In his role, he's been part of the executive leadership team, comprising the directors of Atlanta, Moscow, and Tokyo centers. Before joining WANO, Ingmar was the managing director for E.ON Nuclear Sweden. He's been on the board of all of the nuclear companies in Sweden and chairman of OKG AB. Ingmar has held numerous site-level positions in the Swedish nuclear industry, including site vice president, plant manager, technical director, and chief of staff and manager. Ingmar, take it away.
Thank you. Just to sort of show my normal view from my office in the background, that's London. Unfortunately, I'm sitting at home in Sweden, in a bedroom where I organized an office for myself, but that's the way it is. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I just want to remind you of the WANO mission because it's important. And the mission is to maximize the safety and reliability of nuclear power plants worldwide by working together to assess, benchmark, improve performance through mutual support, exchange of information, and emulation of best practices. We can conclude, as we get reports of events worldwide, that we don't see a significant impact of COVID-19 on the number of events or the seriousness of events. And I think that gives, from a global perspective, a view that plants have put in very strong mitigation plans to deal with COVID-19. These plants have been very successful because the plants have been able to maintain safe and reliable operation worldwide. I would support the statement that the plans implemented in the power plants have been probably better than in other businesses or even national plans. We noticed that outages have been successfully completed. We know there has been some activities deferred to later dates in agreement with regulators around the world. But the situation has had consequences. We are now have new ways of working. We have many restrictions like social distancing. We need to wear masks. Many of our meetings are virtual meetings today. And I will come back to this situation a little bit at the end of my talk. You know, many of our activities in WANA are carried out face-to-face. Some of our core programs, like peer review, have been significantly impacted. Nevertheless, WANA has rapidly adapted to remote working, and we have been able to provide some support to our members during this period. But WANA is not reviewing compliance. WANA does field observations, and those are much more difficult to do today. But we tried new ways of engaging with our members. We launched a web page called COVID resource page on the member website. It is the most popular web page with a lot of document downloads, and the content of this is that individual plants have shared their crisis plans, or whatever you would like to call it. It's open for all members to download, to review, and we have also done a more systematic summary with, you can search on certain topics and you can find a document which mentions, could be entrance to a site, could be whatever you, temperature measurements or so. We were asked if we could facilitate a meeting between medical officers around the world. And we did a webinar with some 20 medical officers from many countries, and they discussed how do we deal with COVID-19 cases, when people are infected, how do we deal with that on the sites, when they have recovered, what kind of tests or what kind of precautions do plants have to take before they allow them back on sites, and many of these things. As WANA is not a medical expert organization, we just facilitated that medical officers came together and discussed these topics. It has been a success. We have done 3 of these events, and there is another planned. Just recently, a few days ago, we held a worldwide human performance forum. We had 200 participants from 68 members and 24 countries, where we talked about reinforce human performance activities, especially during these changing times with restrictions and staff being limited staff being on site. We're also working with and in regular contact with other organizations like IAEA, NEA. We're planning and preparing for new ways of working, what we sometimes speak about, the new normal. But we need to remember the nature of our work involves international peers from other member organizations coming together to support and review power plants. And it is difficult right now. It's a little bit easier to carry out these missions in countries which have multiple members, like the US, Japan, China. But initially, we lose the international element of these reviews. We're using video conference tools, IT tools, video plant inspections where possible with some of our members. But unfortunately, also we encounter problems that IT systems do not allow connection to such services. But we're trying to work through these issues. A key message I would like to leave you with is that these quarantine measures to access plants are not sustainable. Currently, we are planning a peer review at a multi-unit site with a team of more than 50 people. At present, this team needs to quarantine 2 weeks before entry to the country, an additional week near the site before entry to the site, and then, in many cases, 2 weeks on return to their home country. In total, 5 weeks for one mission. We need a system that allows us to do tests before accessing a facility, maybe daily monitoring, strict hygiene, and social distancing. And we're trying to do this together with like-minded organizations such as IAEA. We also sometimes feel that plants are more restrictive than or not really logical in the way they handle these things, because they've done outages with international teams, but when Warner comes, there are limitations, and we are sometimes not accepted as an international team. We need to get beyond this. We need to learn how to deal with the risks involved in having international teams coming to sites. Finally, I'd like to raise a little bit of a warning finger. We have spoken about it briefly. Our new ways of working will most likely introduce new challenges and risks. The aim of the Human Performance Forum, which we held, was to get attention to these new challenges. We can possibly see an emerging trend of human errors with consequences such as scrums or unsafe working. And I believe that we as an industry need to acknowledge this fact and act now before it becomes an issue. I think it's better to act upon weak signals, maybe not full correlation between events and human errors, than to wait for a more significant event. In essence, we need to protect our people to protect our plants. And this business is very much about people, and we must understand that the situation for our staff at the site is very different from what they're used to. They're doing the best, and I agree, we have the best people in our industry, very committed, doing the utmost. For instance, in many of our eastern countries, shifts live on site in satellite cities. They're isolated from their families. They work on 12-hour shifts and just to eliminate risks. And they do that very successfully. But we need to care for them. We need to understand what changes, what the changes in working conditions, how that could affect things we don't think about right now. So that is my recommendation. Let's think about the unthinkable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingmar, for those comments. I think they've really highlighted the complications and challenges that our industry is overcoming globally. And as you point out, it really does come down to the exceptional and committed people that we have in this industry who've been performing so well through this crisis. Now, we're moving on to the question and answer period. I have to say the presentations, our speakers today have really been exceptional, and I've been taking notes like crazy with my own questions, but because of the time limitations here, I think it's only fair that we hand it over to the questions that have come from the people watching the webinar here. And so I'm going to hand it over to Ahab to lead our panelists through some or all of these questions in the 15 minutes we have remaining. So over to you, Ahab.
Great. Well, thank you very much, John. We do have a host of very good questions. Some of them have been answered in writing when they were pretty specific questions. I'm going to start with a question from Ari, who says, given the success of the nuclear sector in preventing the spread of COVID amongst staff and facilities, what key suggestions can be applied to more congregant settings like transit and large offices to ensure that the economy can move forward broadly? I'm going to push this one over to the utilities and Wano, and I'll save a couple of other doozies for the regulators.
So Ahab, I can start. So I go back to the fundamentals. So I talked about screening, cleaning, and distancing. And if you look, start in the office setting, because at OPG, we have started to move back, I said, into our offices. And so we've applied very much the same kind of fundamental principles, recognizing that, that there's some fundamental differences between an office and a plant. But, you can still apply screening techniques. So for example, we our solutions team came up with a very innovative and cheap temperature screening. It's basically it's one of these it's fairly cheap temperature camera with an iPad that they configured, that it's self-serve. People can come in as they get into the plant, into the office, they can screen themselves. We have, we've got protocols in the elevators that where we limit two per elevator. And we've got, distinct markings on the floor where people can stand and go. There's hand sanitizers everywhere. We've got a team on site to respond to any issues that staff might have. And we've the way we've staffed, we've gone to 50% capacity so that you can manage physical distancing. So that's an office environment. More difficult situations like transit, et cetera. Our protocol is that if you can't maintain that physical distancing, you have to wear a mask. And so I think that's the protocol that the transit authorities are going to apply for, whether it's on a subway, on a bus. I think that's largely what you have to do to be able to manage that. So again, it's a little bit more difficult, if you're trying to manage large numbers of people, but I think you follow the same fundamentals that you would in a plant.
Thank you very much, Sean. Anything to add from James or Ingemar?
I agree with Sean. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, the situation in Canada is probably very different from the situation in France and the UK and in China and so on. So it's difficult to have sort of a general view on this. We just reviewed a possibility to open the one office in London. We are on the 35th floor. We realized that with the limitations in the elevators, it would probably take about 90 minutes to enter the office waiting in line for elevators, and it probably be 90 minutes down again. So there was no possibility to go out for lunch. So we decided we will wait until we have more possibilities. And also public transport in London is more or less, we would allow people to come to the office if they could walk or come by bicycle, but not use public transportation. And it's different from country to country, this how the regulations are and the limitations are. So it's in Sweden is quite open. We can use public transport with keeping social distancing and so on. But in other countries, it's completely locked down. So very difficult to answer in a general way.
So agree with everything that's been said, and it's always tough to apply our learnings everywhere. I mean, what I always like to say is we don't need to be Harvard smart. We can be farmer smart, and that's what we say here in Bruce County. And we need to make sure we're continuing to use our common sense. So somewhere like public transit, the three things that would come to mind from my perspective is, anywhere we have people, we need to make sure there is hand sanitizer, easily accessible. If it's easily accessible and people see hand sanitizer, I know you go to Sean's facility, our facility, it's hand sanitizer everywhere. We need people to be cleaning their hands all the time. Any infectious disease expert will tell you how important that is. And also getting people in the habit of cleaning before and after use. So if you're at a lunchroom or a cafeteria, there's cleaning supplies available. You can wipe your surface, dispose of it. Those are really simple things. Obviously, those materials have a cost to them, but if we're going to operate, we have to do those things. The one other area that I think Canada is behind on, and I think we're catching up, everybody should wear a mask. If you are out, whether it's a cloth mask, a non-surgical mask, everybody should wear a mask. Now in a plant, and whether it's Bruce or OPG, obviously we'd like to have people in masks all the time, but there's other health and safety items we have to keep in mind, three-way communication. But, to be honest, if you're out on public transit, you're out in a grocery store, you're even pumping your own gas, wear a mask. I don't know why. I feel we haven't been aggressive enough on that. It's catching up. But, there was a study that the president and CEO of the University Health Network shared a number of weeks ago. And I mean, you have to be careful because there's a lot of ranging information. But what they did was they looked at the countries in the world who had implemented heavier mask use. And the countries that had implemented much heavier mask use, dramatic impacts on the curve. And so, I think we need to be far more aggressive. If you're using any of these public places, wear a mask. If there's an issue that comes up and you have a breathing issue, we'll take the mask off. But I think we got to use our common sense. People have to be able to clean their hands, clean their work surfaces before and after, or surfaces they participated in, and always wear a mask.
Thank you very much. The next question is going to, I think, Ramsey. It is from our colleague Carrie Blaise at the Canadian Environmental Law Association. She says, thank you for the presentation. Can you speak to how CNSC inspectors have been able to conduct their on-site inspections during COVID? Have there been changes to the frequency of inspections or changes made to procedure, i.e. in person versus paper reviews? Secondly, have changes resulted to the IEMP and the ability to take samples and frequency of monitoring? Over to you, Ramsey.
Thank you, Ahab, and thank you, Carrie. It's good to hear from you. From CNSC perspective, I will start with the fact that we put the primary priority is on the safety of our staff. So we started to look at the inspections protocol itself. First is the safety of our staff. So we put in place quite significant protocols for our staff to follow. And as a matter of fact, the operators' requirements, I'm going to say it far exceeded any of the most common denominator being in the public health authorities. And so we had to follow their requirements. What does this mean? We did put staff on site. We already visited the sites and to look at the implementation of the pandemic. With respect to the question, has there been a change from on-site inspection to the desktop review? Yes, we are still evaluating and we're planning the inspections based on risk-informed decision-making. But I would like to assure the public that if there is any event or if there are any requirements for us to enter the site, we are ready to enter at any time with respect to conducting our regulatory oversight. The desktop reviews, as I mentioned earlier, our staff review the analysis and the data coming directly from the licensees and operators' information. So they have full access. And this is one of the privileges I can speak that the Canadian regulator has to have on-site inspector with remote capability that some other, I know might disagree with me, but other operators will not give to the regulator, and the regulator does not have access on site because we work with international regulators. And I can say as a proud Canadian, they are envious to our capability to review on a daily basis the plant conditions. Our staff attend virtually the daily briefings on site that takes place. In addition, we determine based on risk-informed decision what needs to be done. So Kerry, we applied phased-in approach. And in summary, I'm not going to take the whole time here. We finished phase 1. We are embarking on phase 2 right now. And then, like I mentioned, depending on the outages or what we need to do, we are putting in place requirements. But now the innovation is, do we need to do on-site inspection the same way we did before? I can say to you the answer is no, but we are reevaluating all of the baseline inspections and determining what we need to do without compromise to safety.
Thank you very much, Ramsey. I think we'll go back to the utilities and operators. The next question is from Tony Khan, who says he's been following the statistics on the global impact of COVID-19 and doesn't personally think that most countries can survive a second wave of the pandemic. How will the nuclear industry prepare itself for this second wave if it were to happen? Starting with you, James.
Sure, happy to. Well, I mean, you know, I mean, we don't want to, there's no doubt we've had some success, as you noted in your introduction. And I think the first item, and it's part of our nuclear culture, is we're not complacent about where we are. We're not saying, you know, the worst is behind us. We don't know what the future is going to bring. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave, third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave, or no wave. We just don't know. So the first thing I would say is that I think we're in a stronger position if there is anything that comes up, because, you know, even though we've put all these measures in place, those measures are all still in place. We've got new technologies, we've got all these. So I think we're well positioned for whatever the world may throw at us. I'm not suggesting it's easy, and I'm not suggesting we're taking anything for granted, but I think we're very well positioned. And I think we should expect that we are going to have some challenges as we work through this over the next 18 months. I think we should expect we are going to have community spread in some areas that peak. I think the advantage we're going to have is, you know, I think the world around us is going to be better prepared with areas like PPE. You know, Sean talked about, and Bruce Power, you know, we had to get PPE out to hospitals, so nurses had N95 masks. So, I mean, I think the external world is going to be more prepared. And I think we should expect a second wave is coming, and everything we put in place, we have to continue to challenge ourselves and enhance it. So, you know, I don't want to sound flippant about it, but I think it's coming, and I think we're very well positioned.
Yeah, if I can add, yeah, exactly per James's comment, we're expecting, and you know, all our planning is assuming that we'll get at least another wave of this, potentially more. So our plans are flexible to be able to allow us to back off on some of the work at the sites, to reintroduce some more work from home, you know, to really continue to drive this. You know, our operating crews, you know, we operate on a 5-crew schedule, but we've got plans to go to a 4, to a 3, even to a sequester, where you would have folks, you know, sort of kept in a hotel near the site to manage that. So, you know, like I said, we are assuming that it's going to happen, and that's just based on this how we do and prepare for the worst.
From my side, I really don't see a global trend amongst the operators to relaxing any requirements now. They are maintained, so I don't think a second wave will prolong the whole thing for a long time, maybe beyond what is really sustainable. I think our staff will be tired at the plants. There will be effects on that. But I don't think we will be surprised that there could be a second wave. I think we are prepared for it. I mean, we are probably much more restrictive than other places in society, and we keep those restrictions. We are not lowering the guard at all. We keep the guard up.
All right, so another one, I think, for, well, maybe this is a free-for-all, from Robert Armour, my colleague and partner. The pandemic response has seen closer working of WANO and IAEA to get advice and experience to operators quickly. What changes from these recent events would the panel like to see made permanent? What are we doing differently that you'd like to see kept for the long term?
I guess that's a question for me. We've had over the years very good relationships with IAEA. Those have been strengthened over the years. You know, a situation like this, you explore new ways, whether it is working with virtual meetings, or my clear focus is, how do we support our members the best? And I'm not that concerned about, do we have developed processes for things and compliance and so on. I'm only look at the output, and the output is support to our members. That's what we're here for. So we have developed new things. I mean, the things we share on our website, anything we shared before was reviewed and approved by WANO. On the website now, we have a disclaimer. This is not reviewed or approved by WANA. This is just information sharing. This was kind of a big step for WANA to take. And I had to, talk to people to convince them that this is the best way. And that's the same thing we do with IAEA. We have a common purpose, and that is to make this industry, keep this industry safe. So let's focus on what we're here for and be less concerned about is this according to policies and so on. I'm a very pragmatic person. I want to see things done. I want to see results. Of course, sometimes before we shared the information on our website and made a summary report, which we shared with IAEA, we went back to the members and asked them, is it okay if we share this with beyond the WANA membership? And the members said yes. So we shared it with IAEA, the summary. Doesn't say which station names, doesn't say station names, but that's not the important part. The important part, what are plants doing right now? And what can we learn from that? So I think this will probably change the way WANA is working. I think it will change the way IAEA is working. And I don't think we're going back to the old way of working. There is no way back.
Thank you very much, Ingemar. We have gone slightly over our allotted time. We have a number of questions left, and what I will do is ask the panelists to hang behind and do their best to answer each of these questions in writing so that you can get a response. And I just want to say I found this to be informative. I found it to be heartening. And I want to thank all of the panelists for their excellent presentations. I'm turning it back over to you, John, to ride us out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ahab. It really was an engaging set of presentations and discussion. Thank you for everyone who was able to attend today's webinar, to our panelists, of course, and Gowling's our partner in today's session. I certainly learned a lot, and I know you did too. We do have additional webinars coming up, including one toward the end of the month with the Honorable Seamus O'Regan, the Minister of Natural Resources, who's scheduled to be with us, and looking forward to the opportunity to address our industry. So hopefully we'll see many of you back here in the next couple of weeks, but CNA is doing its best to make these webinars weekly. So we'll see you next week. Thanks again to everyone. Have a good remainder to your day and a great weekend.
Thank you, John. And to the panelists, as I've said, I'm hoping you can do a little homework before you leave just by answering some of these questions in writing. Thanks, everybody.